Welcome to the Nottingham Business School Business Leaders Podcast, where business leaders tell their stories and share their insights. All our guests have a personal connection with Nottingham Business School. So, listen, learn, enjoy and share.
Welcome to this special episode of the Nottingham Business School's Business Leaders Podcast with me, Mike Sassy. Our guests today are three hugely respected women leaders, each at the top of their chosen profession, which means they're all ideally placed to offer a well-informed opinion on the theme of this special episode, which is the role of women in the workplace in Britain in 2023. Now, our first guest is Sian Hampton, who is the CEO of the Archway Educational Trust, an organisation with 1,300 staff, a £50 million turnover, and 8,500 pupils in 9 schools across the East Midlands. We also welcome Natalie Fahy, Reach PLC's Regional Audience and Content Director, who edits daily news platforms in Nottingham and Lincoln, and manages 4 other East Midlands titles, with more than 100 local journalists in her team. And our third guest is Melanie Currie, who is Deputy Dean of our own Nottingham Business School, an internationally accredited business school, one of the largest in the UK, with 400 staff and more than 8,000 students, and of course, based here at Nottingham Trent University. Thank you to you all for joining this episode of the Business Leaders Podcast. Now, you're all experienced women leaders. I want to ask how you see the current state of gender equality in the British workplace. Education traditionally has a strong female representation amongst its staff. So let's start with you, Sian.
Thank you. I think education has traditionally, as you say, been somewhere where women have tended to flourish, especially in primary education. However, if you look at some of the data around secondary education, you will note that more secondary head teachers across the country are men than women. And as we've seen the birth of the multi-academy trust sector, again, many men have risen to the top of that very, very quickly. And it's actually taken a little bit of maturity in the system for there to be some beginning of gender equality across that, and some understanding that actually that equality is really, really important, because we're educating young women and young men, and this is the future of our society. So I'm pleased to say that at Archway Learning Trust, our ELT is more
ELT.
women. Our executive leadership team, we have 5 women and 3 men on it. And we also have more female leaders at secondary level than we do male leaders.
Is that unusual within the sector?
It is. It is unusual in the sector.
And have you had is that because they have a female boss?
I don't know whether it's actually because I am the female leader of the organisation, and then there's maybe some more confidence about applying because you see somebody that looks a little bit like you, sounds like you, and you think therefore there's more opportunity. Whether there's a sense of unconscious bias, I don't know, in my appointment processes. I suspect that plays a part also. But also, I think there's something about recognising real talent. And in our sector, there are a lot of really, really talented women, as well as men.
Sure. So, Melanie, also in education, in the university sector, how does that compare with yourself? Is that what you see?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as Sian has said, I think there's a lot of women in education, which is fantastic. So I think in equality levels, particularly at university, that's pretty on par. I think, of course, then you have differences in terms of the how that works out across the levels. So you get a lot of females doing leadership roles, course leadership, course management, a lot of the emotional support type work. And then as you kind of go through the various levels, then there's differences at different stages. So at the professor level, then there can be differences in terms of that representation. I mean, I think it's really good in terms of stepping back and looking at the progress. I think the fact we're having these conversations all the time in terms of our EDI and thinking about where we are, our equality, diversity, impact. So we're thinking about not just gender, but all the different types of colleagues that are working. So I think that's the first step. So I think we have seen improvements, but there's more to do as the.
But you see it going in the right direction.
Yeah, I do see it going in the right direction in terms of, as you say, lots more female leaders in roles helps other people see that they can do that and that's possible. But I think we must also recognise that people have choices about what they want to do. So sometimes also females can step out for some time. They may choose to do that. We saw a lot of that post-COVID, a lot of people not returning to the workforce. So I think you've always got to take the kind of statistics and the issues and be recognising it's about people having choices. So equality of choice about doing things is really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Natalie, I can't resist throwing in my 10 pence worth here. I remember as an editor in a daily newspaper at the time, which would now be a daily website, there were 56 editors in Britain, and there was one woman, one single woman editor.
I think I'm going to be the outlier in this situation, I'm afraid, because journalism, as you know, full disclosure, Mike used to be my boss quite recently.
Thanks, Nat.
So journalism is a very male-dominated industry. I mean, it still is. I'm the editor of the Nottingham Post, as you've said, and Nottinghamshire Live, the website. I am the first female editor ever of the Nottingham Post, and it's taken 150 years, which is quite a shock, really. So Reach PLC, which I work for, 61% of the employees are male and 39% are female. We have got quite a few female leaders coming up through the ranks now because of things we've had to put in place to make sure that women can do that. We've got a women mentoring scheme. We've got people in senior women leadership roles who are actively making sure other women can come up through the ranks as well. But there's still that kind of laddish culture and laddish image of journalism. So, Mike, you worked in journalism in the 90s and the early 2000s. There were always things like, the five-a-side football club. There would be like the cricket playing on the radio all day. There would be like the football on the TV all the time. And if, as a woman, you spoke up and said, I don't want that, everyone would go, shut up, what's wrong with you? And there was that kind of laddish image of, we've got to be really hard and get out there and get the stories. Whereas in fact,
has that changed now? Is it you see that as...
It has changed. It's changed absolutely hugely. It's turned on its head. To be a journalist, you need to be kind. You need to be empathetic. And in fact, if you went out and tried to get a story like that, you might have the door slammed in your face. But I think you need the women in leadership roles in order to create that change. Two of the top people at Nottingham Post now are women. Gemma Toulson, she's the head of content. I'm the editor. We work together and we set the culture. So it's not like that. But
and is this that there are more women editors? I mean, I can see that there are, but there
are more women editors. But in the Midlands, I'm the only female editor. So we've got Birmingham, Stoke, Leicester. They're all men. But you need the women there for that diversity of opinion. And
so why is it that other sectors are changing at a more rapid rate, if they are?
Why are they changing at a more rapid rate? I think it's the way the job is or was. We're going to talk about how COVID disrupted things, I'm sure, later. But as a woman, if you were pregnant, pregnancy is a big issue in many women's lives, not all, of course. But if you were pregnant, you suddenly couldn't go out on lots of jobs, or it might not feel safe to do so. And then you had to have time away from the workplace, and when you came back, maybe you didn't want to do those late shifts anymore because you wanted to be there to put the kids to bed or whatever. Sure. And, I have to be totally honest, I've got a partner who's a stay-at-home dad, and he's supported me massively, which has helped me get to the place I am now. But I want to make it easier for people coming up behind me to know that they can take time out for the family if they want to.
Okay, so you've touched upon one issue there, but let me just throw in the big one, cash, obviously. Yeah. So if I say that the Office for National Statistics says that women still earn 15% less than men, and interestingly enough, in media and education, women like yourself will earn on average 25% less than their male colleagues. And the figures show that this is changing, but very slowly. So, what could be done to speed it up?
Well, actually, I think I've got really strong views about education and girls in the education system, and I try to go out to schools and speak to people. And I think we need to get girls when they're young and say to them, look, you can do this as a job if you want to. It's not just journalism, it's science, maths, engineering, all those kinds of things. You can do these things. But we need to get girls to be more assertive, I think. Since I've become the person who decides about people's salaries, I've seen that there are a lot of men come to me and say, can I have a pay rise? And there's not as many women doing that. I mean, that's just anecdotally.
So you think the gender pay gap is to a certain extent in the hands of women themselves?
Partially, not totally, obviously. Companies have got to do a lot to help women as well. We need to make flexible working normal, and that's going to encourage more women to not only come to your company and take the job and take the promotion, but to stay there too. Because turnover is a massive problem, and when women get pregnant, they leave the workplace. But I work for Reach. We've done a lot to help close that gender pay gap. And I've got some stats here. So in 2020, the mean pay gap was 16.3%, and it's down to 13.6% in 2021. So we are making moves to try and do that. Obviously, I checked the BBC stats before I came as well, and they're at 6.3%. So they've obviously done a lot more.
Is it easier for a public organisation to do that kind of thing? If I say to you, Sean, you're not a public organisation, you're a private organisation, but you sort of straddle the two to a certain extent, and I'm guessing you're in charge of wages. How do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that comment about people coming into the workplace. I mean, I think there's been a shift since COVID, full stop, and to some extent, the millennials coming through the system are much more confident about asking for a pay rise or starting on a higher salary than I ever was when I started in my profession. They'll sit in an interview and you'll offer them the job and they'll say, well, I will take it, but what are you going to offer me? Which for me, culturally, as a public servant, is really, really odd.
So did you say that's in the last 2 years? That's since COVID?
Since COVID, but it was already creeping in. I think the generation coming through post the millennium simply aren't prepared to do the same things that we got used to doing. Maybe I'm just showing my age. You're a lot younger than me. There is certainly now, post-COVID, this massive shortage of staff. And so to some extent, it is in the employees' hands, those conversations. But I agree that it's more normal for a man to be asking for a better wage than it is for a woman.
Is that something you're seeing too, or is it?
I would say, obviously, we have the very big privilege of educating lots of the future generation, and I do see a lot of positives there, that there is a sense that they're not going to just say, I'll follow what's always happened.
Yeah,
so I do think there's a lot more optimism.
And is that a recent thing?
I would say probably in higher education, you've probably seen that, the last 8 to 10 years, that sense of I want to be able to work more flexibly. I want to work wherever. I think COVID has accelerated that because that's not possible
agreed.
to be a digital nomad and to have multiple careers, and a lot more people starting their own businesses. So I think there's a lot of positives.
But why is that? So how would it be? Would there be a gender difference there? Because of the things that you've described, or I think that you've all described, could go across men and women. Is it that women are taking more advantage of that, or is it just a greater opportunity for them, or what?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Sian in a sense that I think we are seeing more people feeling comfortable asking about pay and conditions than perhaps previously. So I think that's a good thing, and you're right, it can feel like, oh, okay, we're having that conversation. But actually, if you think about the statistic where the Equal Pay Day in the UK is something like the 20th of November in 22, where, those things are really important because they land with people. And I think social media plays a big role in that, because the generation coming into the workforce, are part of that and understand that, and the whole kind of TikTok generation. So I think they see these things. So on those sorts of days, there's a lot of organisations that will be on social media revealing the individual pay differences. They do that for universities, they do that for education establishments, they do it for private. So you're socialising that conversation. And I think then that lands with people to say, hold on a minute, I might think about this. I do think there's still a lot of conditioning, particularly, in the age profile of organisations. Older colleagues will ask less because they've been conditioned to think, no, I don't talk about that. So when you talk about equal pay, I think there's differences across all the segments in an organisation. So I think it's fantastic that the younger generation coming in feel comfortable with that, because only in having those conversations will we see those changes come through. Whereas I think it was in a lot of conditioning that's not something that you talk about.
Okay, so that's the cash aspect. What follows on naturally from that is the issue of promotion. Is the glass ceiling still in place? Now, at the end of last year, this sticks in my mind for whatever reason. The tax office, HMRC, big nationwide employer, said that in the previous 12 months it had recruited 6,200 men, but it had recruited 6,700 women, and it also promoted within its own organisation 4,700 men, but it promoted 5,000 women. Which I looked at that and thought, is that unusual, or is it something that's mirrored across most organisations?
I mean, again, I think that's part of the whole, change where organisations with more than 250 employees have to reveal their pay differences, and they have to have plans and objectives about how they're going to make and close those gaps. So I think, again, that's really important in that conversation. And I think it's also recognising that you can only change things by, having plans not for this year but next year, the year after. It's that kind of future forward workplace. And of course there's gaps and pockets in all workplaces about, skills and talent. So people are looking wider and further for some of that. Is there a glass ceiling still in place? I mean, of course, it depends in organisations. I think it's very much a case that you have to push through as a female in lots of organisations.
Work harder than a man to be promoted.
I think you have to feel comfortable with promoting yourself in terms of recognising there is that ceiling that may or may not be recognised by other people, but you have to advocate for yourself. You have to be your own promotional person, and that's an uncomfortable thing for lots of females, because again it's conditioning about, don't make a fuss, don't say anything, somebody will notice that you're doing great work. And when I said earlier that we have a lot of colleagues who do fantastic work in course leadership roles, who mentor, support students, provide a lot of emotional support, in some ways there's a hopeful recognition that will be noticed and then promotion will follow, but you still have to push forward.
Twice in what you have said, you've talked about women being particularly good at offering emotional support. Does that lead to, Natalie, I'm coming to you, does that lead to women being pigeonholed, perhaps? Because I absolutely recognise that. I see it completely, and is this good or bad? But I used to use that myself. When you have middle managers who are women and who are very good at their job, and you have a difficult situation which they're more adept at than yourself, you ask them to do it. Is that the kind of thing which is good or bad?
Well, I think it's good, because you do need those people in the mix who can sympathise with people. And there are some people in my team, at least, that, might have a particular issue, and they will only speak to a woman about it because they don't feel comfortable speaking to a man. But sometimes they can be pigeonholed. And, I can think of examples from when we used to work together where there's one particular person who used to sort of be the agony aunt for the newsroom in a way, so that is a bad thing. But back to what you were saying, Melanie, about the fact that women have to sort of promote themselves. I thought that was a really interesting point, because I feel like as a woman, you need to do everything. You need to be at this kind end of the spectrum, but also you need to be at the assertive end of the spectrum as well, promoting yourself. And you need to sort of be extra resilient in a way. I mean, there's been times where I've been in meetings where, you've spoken to those same people I've spoken to in the past. And I've kind of thought to myself, I bet you would not have spoken to Mike like that. Sorry to bring you personally into it. So in a way, I felt like I had to be, doubly resilient on what you were, and kind of even more, not defensive, but defending myself. And so, it's difficult to try and be everything, because you don't want people to think that you're horrible or, this really kind of hard-nosed person.
And yet men aren't worried about that kind of thing.
So, I mean, actually thinking about it now I'm talking about it, I think I actually have this internal struggle quite a few days where I'm like, well, I need to be assertive and resilient, but also I am actually a nice person, so you can talk to me about your problems. So it's difficult.
Is this something you've come across, Sean?
Well, funny you should mention that. I just think leadership calls on us all to have a whole range of tools in our toolkit. And I suspect that women have to have more, potentially, than men. And again, I think this goes back to the culture around what we see as good leaders. And I think what we have traditionally seen as good leaders is somebody who's hard and is tough and is resilient and is risk-taking and can be aggressive, not assertive. And actually, we know from the massive amounts of research that actually leadership may involve some of those traits, but actually good leaders can actually be vulnerable to be strong. They can show that they aren't omnipresent, or they don't have a monopoly on wisdom. They don't have to work 24 hours to be effective. And I actually think as female leaders, that's the area where we need to change people's thinking. It's a cultural thing about what is really leadership about and what makes a good leader.
And I would agree, and I just want to make that point about there's something to do with also girls, and particularly in the education, you see this in GCSE and A-level, the sense of girls set themselves really high perfection. So perfection is what's measured, getting all the A's, the A stars, getting to the best, really striving, follow that through in education, get the best qualifications. Have for quite a long time now, both at GCSE and A-level and now at degree level, girls are obtaining better than males. But coming with that level of perfection is this sense that you can't show a weakness.
Yes,
there can't
I
be
agree.
a chink, that you have to be perfect all the time. And actually, to be a good leader, you have to say, do you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you.
Whereas boys, quite happy to show their weaknesses. They don't care if they're seen as a bit lazy or...
And I also think in terms of this glass ceiling, I think we've gone through this process of having to demonstrate our data, so our gender equality data, and I think that's a really, really strong thing. But actually, how many of us are challenged about the clarity of our developmental work and our promotion opportunities? So they need to be really transparent. It's not a tap on a shoulder because you know somebody who knows somebody. And that's what we need to counter. So every employee should have a clear route through an organisation that is offered to them and that they're provided training for, and when promotions become available, there is a clear and transparent process so that they can apply for those. And I think if we do more of that, then the likelihood of these glass ceilings is much more,
And this is something we've really been working on at Reach in recent years. So we've got an apprenticeship scheme before we never had. Our first apprentice, again, for however many years. 61% of our apprentices last year were women. And we've got transparent pay benchmarks now, which we never had before. We've got career progression frameworks for everybody. But all this has been very recent. But, I'm under no illusion that this will help women, definitely. And
I think it is that support, as you say, because sometimes females don't go for the promotion because they think they can't do everything that's on that job specification, therefore it's not for them. Whereas men will say, I might take a punt on doing that. So I think it's a lot of education in that process, and coaching and mentoring and supporting women through, you can do this. So the perfection doesn't mean you have to be absolutely 100%. There has to be those development opportunities.
There was a line in what you said there earlier, another one of your throwaway lines, which was the fact that it's statistically recognised that women achieve better results, GCSE, A-level, degree level. So is the answer of having and yet obviously there's still this huge pay gap, is the answer this career path which Sian outlined that people should be given when they join an organisation, or is there something more than that?
I think the career path is really important, but I also think that mentoring and supporting and coaching, so that you believe that you can do this, and that you're helped. So we're all in the roles that we are because women have gone before us and moved through. So every generation pays back to the next generation. So these things, as Natalie said, will take time. I think there's some statistic like the gender pay gap, if we do nothing, or keep moving, won't close to 2058 or some such thing. So there has to be times that you really push.
You're talking about women helping women. If you're in an organisation like Natalie's, which is historically dominated by men, women helping women, well, there weren't many women there in the first place, so it has to be across men as well.
Yes, of course. I think it's about making sure that everybody you're reaching all the talents and you're supporting all of the people in your organisation into different roles and responsibilities.
But there has to be a degree of positive discrimination in favour of women. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think I'm saying, but I think you've got to recognise that in terms of advertising for roles, that you have to not just close down the box very quickly and say, I only want this type of person, that you have to be open to people from all sorts of talents.
But actively being helpful to, don't get me wrong, it's the brightest, it's the highest achievers at GCSE and A-level and degree, so don't get me wrong.
Well, I think an encouragement to put yourself forward, but not to see that as a failure if you don't get it, because only by trying do you learn and move forward. So I think it's recognising that you have to be in that mix, because if you stand outside it for quite a long time thinking, oh, that's not for me, I'll wait another 5 years to do this and then I'll go forward. What's happening then, it's a bit like the glass escalator. Men are going to pass you by at a quicker speed in the speed that you're having. So I think it's about having that equality of choice for everybody, and a good leader is trying to make sure that's part of the organisational mix.
Okay. We touched in a number of times in what we've been talking about on the pandemic, and I know that there's obviously a big movement towards more remote and hybrid working. What effect has that had on gender? I know you work a lot of remotely, don't you, Natalie?
Mostly remotely, yeah. It's been a huge help for women, but I'm only saying for women because they're still traditionally the main people who look after children if they have them. So, it's helping parents of all kinds, although that is mostly women. More than ever before, people feel that they can just quickly pop off to take the kids for the school run. And that's fine, as long as you're not working on a story on deadline or you're not supposed to be in a meeting, and you have to trust people to be able to do that. So they'll be gone for like 15 minutes and that's fine. But I found it has improved my quality of life immeasurably because, my kids came to me and said, oh, Mummy, it's so good that you're not in the office every single day now. And I thought, oh, my God, So if we can just... The problem was, before COVID, flexible working wasn't really, let's just be honest, acceptable. It was a bit like, okay, what's that person doing? They're not really doing anything at home. So now that COVID has come along, and we've seen that we can do it, and we can get our daily newspaper out every day, we can meet our page view targets. Nottinghamshire Live at the moment, we're ahead of target, we're performing really well, but we all work remotely. So now we've seen we can do it because we were forced to. We've normalised it, but I think in some industries still there might be that kind of feeling that, okay, you should really be in the office and be present to be able to.
But in terms of,
I know in education you do have to be present also. So.
Yes. But is it?
If only.
Has it been a benefit for women more than men, or is it just the same?
I think it's been a benefit for parents and people who are slightly older. I totally accept that young people do, and people who are just coming to the industry find it difficult. And we know as a company we've still got a lot of work to do in that area. But more women. I think it encourages more women to come and work for us and to stay with us as well. So it decreases the turnover because they know that if they ever went to that stage in their life, there would be flexibility and acceptance that,
So it's a straight positive. It's a straight positive. It's a straight positive.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sian, have you found?
It's more tricky in my sector because essentially we provide childcare for the nation's parents so they can go to work. Hopefully we provide a little bit more than that, but essentially that is our function. And I can't see any government anytime soon accepting that we can do things remotely. All the digital poverty aside, I actually think that there were young people who learnt better remotely. Not 5 days a week, not like it was during the pandemic, but there were some ghost children, the hidden children, the quiet children, often the girls who didn't like to speak up, that actually really flourished working online. And I actually think that education in the next 10, 15, 20 years may completely change, and we may actually see some online learning and a hybrid model for young people too. However, the other function of school, other than providing an education, obviously, is about socialisation, and you can't do that on your own in your bedroom. And I think that's always going to be really, really important.
And does that problem affect young women more than men?
I'm not sure it does. I think that what we see in schools is that young women tend to be more effective communicators, actually, than men. They are very effective on their mobiles and the TikTok and all of that. which sometimes gets in the way. But they are also much more likely to sit and talk together and to meet together. Boys tend to socialise around an event such as a football game or something to do rather than choosing necessarily to just sit and have a chat. To make huge stereotypical gender assertions. In terms of the workforce, teachers have to come into work, and therefore that flexibility isn't there, and they did like that flexibility during lockdown. But we found that the infrastructure around the teaching staff, so people in finance and people in HR, etc., having some hybrid working is actually really effective, and they have flourished on that. And I think it's both male and female. I agree, it's parents that find that flexibility particularly attractive.
Again, I'm going to draw two things together. We've established that young women are better achievers within the academic, initial exams in school and then further on. And now you're saying they're also better at socialisation.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a big question here, Melanie. How can that all feed? And yet there's still this huge gender pay gap. When will all that feed through into the workforce?
Wow, that's a question. I think the challenge is about at what time does the kind of that wave of incoming super talent that we have of, young girls, young men come in, really change the workforce. So I think that wave is really building to change the workforce. But of course, at the other end of the workforce, you have some resistance potentially to some of the new ways or the ability to work flexibly or to be your authentic self. So it's in the not too distant future, I remain optimistic that incoming wave of fantastic talent and respect and wanting, to change the environment and to have better places is going to, to kind of be the tipping point in organisations.
What might create that tipping point?
I think it's probably just a few more years of that really changing the demographic in organisations. I mean, if you think about some of the big social media companies, you see a lot, again, they get good and bad reviews, but the sense to which they try to make their workplaces a really social environment, yes, they can that to make them work very hard, but the sense to which it's recognising the whole person. And I think what COVID probably gave us was the sense of recognising the whole person a little bit more and their value in an organisation. I think it would be remiss of us if I didn't say that, COVID did have a lot of impact on females in terms of the emotional labour is carried more, and there was a lot of research suggesting that, women were held back a little, whether that's in research careers or, professional careers, because they maybe had to carry a bit more of the schooling or the unseen stuff at home. But I think at least that's, again, in that conversation and recognising that we must, move and change those things. So I always remain optimistic.
Absolutely. I'm hesitating to throw this next one in there because it's a statistic which I know I've spoken to or I've showed you all previously, but I was a bit shocked by it. I'm pushing at an open door here because it feeds into a lot of what you've been saying. There's a big HR survey carried out every year, and last year's survey, 6,000 women across Britain, 96% of them believe that having a female boss would improve their working day. It's written, it's very nicely written, so don't get me wrong. It's obviously playing to an audience, but 96%, does that chime with you, Nat?
That's an astounding statistic, isn't it? I wonder who they surveyed. Always a bit doubtful about these. But me personally, I think I'm not bothered as long as my boss has, or my leader has, all those qualities that we've talked about, can actually be empathetic.
Is that because you've achieved now?
No, I don't think so, no. But looking at it from the other side, people in my team have said to me, I'm so glad to work in a team where there's a female editor. And I've thought, God, I've really not thought about that before. And that's kind of inspired them to
And I sat and listened to that as well. I sat and heard that a lot. Yeah. Not to be saying I'm but saying, it's great working for this woman. no man ever said it's great to work for a man, in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've had...
Obviously.
My current line manager is a great man, just on the record. That's really good. He went to his nativity and told me about it, and I thought, okay, that's fine. It's acceptable for me to go to my nativity as well then, if you did.
Nat, what are you looking for? A report on his nativity play or some of...
Okay, just to get to the point, I don't particularly want a female boss. I just want a boss that can be a good leader and have all those qualities I'm looking for. So I'm not really sure why people would say they particularly want a female boss. I mean, it is nice to have a woman to talk to, because, then you can say, right, I've got to go and do this, or, I've had someone say to me, I've got to tell you this because the lads won't understand, kind of thing. So I think you need those female colleagues, definitely. But in terms of a line manager, I personally am not particularly bothered about whether it's a man or a woman.
Okay, Sian, what do you think when you hear a stat like that? Do you believe it?
I find it a bit weird. Maybe what it says about those 6,000 women is that they're being really badly led by 6,000 male leaders.
So that's not 6,000. That's a story about 6,000 bad male managers, right? Okay.
But it doesn't. I mean, I don't know. I'm very similar to Natalie. I have been led by great and bad, both men and women. And actually, what I found is that spurred me on in my own career, because I've always thought, gosh, I could do a better job than they're doing. And so I found that quite motivational, having a bad leader. But I don't think it's gender specific. I do think there's maybe a more serious point that sort of sits behind it all, which is that there are some genuine issues that face women in the workplace that aren't having to be faced by their male counterparts. Being pregnant at work, going through your menstrual cycle at work, having the menopause to deal with at work. These are things that we don't talk about, often get put down into the hysterical woman category.
Still.
Yeah.
And
we should talk about them.
And we should talk about them, because they are physical changes that a woman has to go through that our male counterpart doesn't. And I'm not saying that, there aren't issues, for example, like testicular cancer, that maybe we should be talking about more in the workplace also. But the reality is that there are things that we suffer that men don't. And therefore there is a sense that only a woman can understand, which is nonsense. I think it's more that women feel more confident to talk to another woman about it, because they feel that they will understand it better.
Sure. So, Melanie, but aren't these societal things as opposed to workplace specific?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at a lot of the research, particularly in women, about gender, in the kind of the words and the terminology that are used, whether, that social conditioning of what you're expected. So I was gobsmacked by your stat, because I was thinking, really? Because I've seen so many reports that say the opposite. I wouldn't want a female boss because they would be, like the queen bee, they'd be horrible to other women. So I think for every one of these reports, there's a kind of counter. So I do think that work starts early days in education, about recognising everybody's value, everybody's opportunity, and trying to move away from those unhelpful labels about good boss, bad boss, male, female. Because for me, the uncomfortableness with the gender thing starts to split us. And as a country, we split about enough things. One is not better than the other. Different times require different leadership. And I agree completely with Sian. It's about that toolkit that you have. Once you start to genderize it a little, it can get into that, all female bosses are like this, or all male bosses are like that. And I think it's about an organisation trying to find and support the best people in the roles at that time. And we shouldn't necessarily think it has to be one or the other. But I think we have, we see that playing out very massively on social media. Again, the kind of gender piece and how young men particularly are feeling a little lost with that, and we're seeing a rise in in lots of misogyny and things. So we have to challenge that. We can't pretend that's not happening, and we have to educate. So sometimes, although I'm a complete advocate for equality, I think sometimes it is unhelpful when we say one is good and one is bad. Men good, women bad. So.
I think that point you made about young men is very important, actually, because we're doing a lot to help women, and that's brilliant. We've still got a lot more to do.
Yeah.
But I do worry that young men are kind of getting neglected. Is that controversial? I don't know. But they seem to be radicalising a lot and, becoming worse, some of them. And, especially young boys at school, they're falling behind. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, we need to help women, definitely, but also we shouldn't forget about the men, and it's about equality, isn't it? Helping everybody
Absolutely.
what they need.
It's about equality, and it can be an unintended consequence of really promoting, particularly in education, come on, everybody do really well, that you can have this left behind, and that's not helpful, because society needs everybody to be moving at a similar pace and having that equality of opportunity.
Sure. And in that vein, okay, so I would ask each of you, what would be the single thing a company or an organisation could do best to foster equality within the workplace? Obviously, to help women achieve everything that they should achieve, but also, as I say, it's broader than that, as you've just brought up in the last discussion, broader than that, to foster equality across the organisation. Sian, what do you think?
I think it's about cultural change, and cultural change is really, really tough. And as I said earlier, I think it's about looking at leadership in a completely different way, and actually saying that leadership doesn't always have to be perfect. It doesn't always have to have all the answers. It doesn't have to be aggressive and cutthroat. It can be collaborative. It can be empathetic. It can be tough and firm and clear. But actually, we need to foster within our organisations, and it's something that I'm working on in mine, a sense where people feel safe to make mistakes, safe to ask questions, and therefore safe in the knowledge that they are looked after, cared for, in order for them to be effective. So they've got to be good at their jobs, because they're responsible for hundreds of young people, and we really, really care about that. So it doesn't mean it's not accountable, and it doesn't mean that difficult conversations won't take place, but that whole area of radical candour, where we can have conversations with people and give them feedback and help them to get better, has to be done within a cultural norm of, this is how we are in this organisation. People feel safe. They know how they can progress. They know what they need to do to progress. And it's not about who you know, it's about how effective you are.
Okay. Natalie, radical candour. Does that fit?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you've said, and I would have said the same myself, but I'm going to say something different now as well. I think we need to change recruitment policies, and I think this is a bit of a problem in my company, actually, and we're aware of it. We're having trouble even getting women through the door in the first place, which is why I spend a lot of my time going around schools and universities like NTU, where we are today, speaking to women and girls and showing them that you can do this job. Because, when it's not a case of sometimes having a short list of equal men, equal women, because I haven't even had any women apply. So I think journalism's got an image problem, and, it's people like me and other editors and other leaders in the industry who need to go around and try and change that opinion of the industry so we can solve the recruitment problem.
Okay, so we've had cultural change, a specific recruitment issue. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both those things. I think there's a saying that, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think lots of organisations are saying the right things and, doing the reports. But at the end of the day, it's about how people feel inside an organisation, and do they feel they're being seen, or do they feel that they're supported and safe? And I think it's really important. Natalie talks about getting people in for the recruitment process. It's equally important when you're doing the recruitment process that you have panels that have wide amount of voices on it. You include people from all parts of the organisation, because I think it's recognising that we've perhaps in some organisations you recruit the people that you've always recruited, and therefore it's very hard to break out of that cycle. And therefore it's important that we are at all stages trying to encourage people to put themselves forward, but to see it as a learning exercise. But I think you cannot move away from that cultural piece being important. People people don't leave organisations, they leave people. So if they don't feel comfortable because they're not being valued,
Sure.
or they're not getting the respect they think they have, or their career's not moving, then they move. And in the current environment, there's a lot of ability to move. So organisations should want to keep those individuals and support them in the ways that they can.
Okay, that's all very clear. I mean, to a greater or lesser degree, that is all about cultural change across all three answers that you gave there. So therefore, if finally I just look at the other side of the equation and we look at young women who are would-be leaders, if you had one piece of advice that you could offer to them as they start off on their career, what might that be, Sian?
We have a motto, a strapline at a lot of the Blue Coat schools, which is believe in yourself, in others and in God, because it's a faith-based organisation. And I think that sense of self-belief is really, really important. And also caring for other people, because you don't want to step on other people in the pursuit of your own career. And I remember waking up to gender inequality sort of probably in my late 20s, 30s, because I was brought up to believe I could do absolutely anything. To the point where my parents thought me applying to university was quaint because I was ever so good with my hands. And off I went to Girton. So that is in my DNA and has been since I was tiny. And it was quite a shock when I realised that actually that wasn't people's lived experiences. So trying to help young people to understand that actually they are perfectly, wonderfully formed. They weren't an accident, that they've got huge potential and can achieve anything that they want is really easy to say and really tough to do. And I suppose a side note to that is that the public schools are brilliant at that.
Yeah,
Inculcating their young people to believe that they are future prime ministers and that they're wonderful. It can breed arrogance, but in a city school, I'd just be grateful if they got to the point where they started to believe that.
So self-belief.
Yeah.
Natalie, what would you ask of them?
I think I'd be saying to them, you need to do things your own way. So carve your own path. So it's that self-belief again.
Yeah.
But, you need to... I think we're going to talk about Karen Brady and that interview she did in The Times in a minute. I did read that and I agreed with a lot of what she said. You need to ignore what people think of you to a certain extent. Because, ignore the people who are rolling their eyes maybe and saying, oh, God, what are you doing? We've never done this before. Or you've done well for yourself. That kind of patronising thing that has been said to me, actually. And when you're building up that resilience, I think you also need to set your boundaries as well. And I think this is quite important for me as a female leader because I'm a little bit in the public eye, not massively. But, I've kind of set my boundaries.
I've seen you on television.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. But, you need to set your boundaries about how much you're going to share of your own life out there. So I never talk about my kids on social media, for example. That's my choice. Some people talk about their kids all the time. That's probably what I'd be saying to people, yeah.
So believe in yourself, carve your own path. Melanie.
Yeah, I think there's a similarity here. For me, it's authenticity, which is very similar. I remember when I took on the job of Deputy Dean, I was like, okay, I now must be different. Today I'm going to be really different. I'm going to talk in a different way because I think these roles require it. I'm going to be incredibly...
Well, just a minute, that's not gender thing. I had that as well. I spent a good 20 minutes trying not to talk like this, but I gave up.
And I thought, I'm going to have to do this now because people are going to expect this of me. And about 2 minutes after I'd had that thought, I thought, no. You're going to be who you are, and people will like you sometimes, and they won't like you, and you can't. It's not about that. It's about making the decisions and having the thoughts and sharing them. So that authenticity, and if you're pretending to be authentic but you're not authentic, that can get into trouble. Yeah. I also think brave. You do have to be brave because there's a lot of walls to knock down. There's a lot of battles to fight. There's a lot of flack that will come your way, but you have to keep focused on what do I want to get? What's the long goal here? Because if you get yourself upset about everything that happens every day, in it comes to fill your mind. So it's like, what do I want? What do I want to achieve for my team, for my students, for the school? What are those goals? And then that bravery and authenticity, I think, are really important.
That's great. And I can't miss out this last question now, which I was going to, seeing as Natalie's already alluded to.
Sorry.
So, and finally, we'll talk about Karen Brady's interview in the Times, which I laughed out loud when I read it. I mean, she's a newspaper columnist as much as anything else, so give them a good headline. Successful businesswoman, company director several times over, BBC's Apprentice, which is where everybody will know her from, where she's a judge. She said that definitely women had better brains than men. Is that something you might agree with, Sian? In your experience, in your leadership?
Definitely no.
Right, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to, because this can go on for
Let's
another
just
half
cut
an hour.
it at that.
I'm going to say you've got one line
One
each.
word.
In your experience.
In my experience, there are as many talented men as there are women out there.
Oh, very diplomatic.
Yeah.
I want to say more than one line. You can cut it out.
2 lines. You've got 2.
But they're different, and I'm going to give you an example of this. So we've got a maternity review going on at the moment at Nottingham Hospitals. I was in conference. Everyone else there was a man, and we were like, what are we going to do with this story now? How are we going to move it on? And I said, well, look, I'm the only person in this room who's actually given birth in that hospital, so I'm going to write about it. And I think that demonstrates the point that you need this diversity of men and women who can all bring different things into it.
So it's not a matter of brain size, Melanie?
No, I agree entirely. It's not. I mean, I think those articles, as you say, they're written to kind of be provocative and fine, but I can't ascribe to that because it takes you down the narrative of, again, pitting people against each other. So I think it's recognising all the talents. However, if that article gets people thinking about that again and thinking, oh, interesting, what do we think? Because as I said to you, a lot of females are very successful until they get into employment, where then the gaps start to become more apparent. So in one level, I'll take it as helpful, but I can't ascribe quite to that simple narrative.
I can't resist saying that. Obviously, I don't agree either. So I'm glad that in the final analysis, there's something that we can all agree on. So I'd say Sian Hampton, Melanie Currie and Natalie Fahy, thank you very, very much for joining us here on the Nottingham Business School Business Leaders Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not check out some of the others that are available, including those with former banking executive Robin Fole and sportswear marketing guru Charlotte Cox. The Nottingham Business School Business Leaders Podcast is produced for Nottingham Trent University by Celtic Tiger Productions. Your presenter was Mike Sassy, and it was produced by John Collins.